is your sense of the kind of orderliness or disorderliness that we're seeing in this world? I feel, because we do this kind of discussion all the time, I feel sometimes there is a strong sense of helplessness, that you know something is wrong, you know something has to be done in a certain way, but it's going to the opposite direction. Do you think we're entering a period of time of great disorientation? And, what could be the danger if that is the case?
Well, unfortunately, I do think we're entering a very turbulent time. Many of these societies in the West are becoming less and less democratic, and it's precisely a product of the deregulation of the financial sector and the incredible power of capital. Now, I think people have pointed out that, yes, in China there are wealthy people, but wealthy people do not control the government, whereas in the West, wealthy people do control the government. We have a small handful of oligarchs, billionaires, who are getting richer and richer and more powerful. And in countries in particular like the United States, but also in some European countries, they have incredible power over the political system. So the Supreme Court in the United States, through Citizens United, was a ruling that said that there is no limit on campaign contributions from big companies, from banks, from wealthy interests. What that means is that essentially, if you're running for office as a politician, you have to do what these large corporations, these large financial interests want. It's the opposite of the Chinese system. And the Chinese system, the big companies, they do exist, but they do not control the government. In fact, they're regulated by the government. Whereas in the U.S., they control the government. They lobby. Lobbying is legal, whereas in many countries this would be illegal. So what we have is this crisis where people don't have influence on government policy. In fact, there are scholars in the United States, including at Princeton and Northwestern University, who did a study. And the study quantitatively showed that average people have zero influence on policy making. Instead, it's lobbying groups and big money groups. So that's why people feel so angry on
But they can vote?
Making. Voting does not mean a democracy. I mean, you can have
That's what,
elections,
as a devil's advocate.
Yeah, I mean, a democracy means rule by the people. But just because you have elections doesn't mean that the politicians who win the elections represent the people. And we can look at many different policies and see that there are policies like universal health care that are very popular, or free higher education. These are very popular policies, but they're not implemented because they're not profitable, because the politicians who win the elections, despite the fact that people vote for them, they don't represent the popular will of the people. And that's why when China talks about whole process people's democracy, it actually can be a true form of democracy, because the reality is that the policies implemented by the Chinese government are more reflective of the interests of the Chinese people than the policies implemented by the U.S. government. So it doesn't matter if you have elections if the politicians who are elected don't actually represent the people. And we've seen this very clearly in the United States. And that's why we're seeing this rise of these very far-right populist movements. And it's because there is a lack of alternatives.
The thing is, look, Donald Trump was in office, and 4 years later, he still has so much popular support, despite the kind of performances that, many people judge to be disastrous. Why are people not making the kind of realizations that they need to be? They're not coming to terms with.
Everything that people learn about what's going on is mediated through the media, right? And the media in the U.S. in particular is very partisan. It's very biased. You have very conservative media like Fox News. You have media that's affiliated with the Democratic Party like MSNBC. Everything is filtered through these lenses. And what we see is that life for many people is getting worse. For average working people, of course, if you're wealthy, you can live very well in the U.S. But for average working people, their wages have been stagnant since the 1970s. We see that you probably won't have Social Security. My generation is being told there will be no retirement funding, no pensions. Healthcare is extremely expensive. Education is prohibitively expensive. So you have all of these problems. Meanwhile, you have more racism, violence, instability. So people can see that their lives are getting worse. And yet they have two choices in the political system, with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The Democrats are incapable of providing alternatives because they ostensibly say they want to provide better policies for working people, but they're also beholden to the big money interests. So they have this contradictory policy where they say they want to give us more education and healthcare, but they don't do it. And then you have Republicans And what is their response? They scapegoat immigrants. They blame feminism. They blame
China.
China for everything. They're now, we have this drug issue. They blame China, which has nothing to do with it. In fact, the drug issue in the U.S. was caused by big pharmaceutical corporations, including Purdue Pharma, which faced dozens of lawsuits for basically giving money to doctors to encourage them to overprescribe medicine like OxyContin, which got people addicted,
Yeah.
and then they get addicted to other
It's
forms.
the consumption that's the problem.
And it's the system, absolutely. And so people are looking for answers, and people like Donald Trump give them easy answers. They're not the correct answers, but easy answers. The problem is China. The problem is immigration. And if you don't have answers from the Democratic Party that convince people, they will look for these kind of populist answers. And it's a very dangerous moment.
Do they not count the money in their pockets?